Hello, my name is Tucker Harrison. For 36 years, I've walked long roads from the lush green mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, to the bustling streets of Seattle, Washington. If you asked me about life before everything fell apart, I'd say it was nearly perfect. I was born in Asheville, a small town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where misty mornings blanketed the valleys and people lived slowly, peacefully. Time seemed to stand still there. My father, John Harrison, was an administrative worker at the local Department of Transportation. He was a man of few words, but every word he spoke carried weight. He loved sitting by the river, fishing rod in hand, his eyes following the quiet flow of the water. He had an odd hobby, collecting antique clocks. I still remember the steady tick-tock of those old clocks in the living room, like the heartbeat of our home. My mother, Jane, was a librarian at the town library. Gentle and always wearing pastel sweaters, she rarely left Asheville. To her, the world beyond our small town seemed not to exist. I grew up in their embrace, in a small wooden house with a creaky porch that groaned whenever the wind blew. Life in Asheville was simple but fulfilling. I didn't dream of grand things, only of becoming a reliable man like my father. But fate has its own way of guiding us. At 18, I left Asheville for Seattle to attend college, and I stayed there, building a new life. I became a financial advisor, working with small and medium-sized businesses. The job wasn't glamorous, but I liked the precision of numbers. I was careful, principled, and always put honor first. Perhaps that was what my father taught me. A man without honor has nothing, Tucker. In Seattle, I met Elena. 4 years younger than me, she had a magnetism I couldn't ignore. Elena was beautiful, with glossy brown hair and eyes as blue as a summer lake. She taught communications at a local university, and every word she spoke exuded confidence and sharpness. Raised in a well-off family, she was nurtured to stand out in any crowd. I first met her at an art exhibition, drawn in by the way she talked about the paintings as if she were telling her own story. 6 months later, we were married. I still remember the moment she walked down the aisle, her white wedding dress gently swaying, and I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. Then came Elizabeth, the greatest joy of my life. At 8 years old, with curly hair like her mother's and a smile that melted everything, Elizabeth loved art, always scribbling with a pencil on any piece of paper she could find. Every night I'd sit by her bed listening as she talked about the paintings she wanted to create when she grew up. "I'll paint the whole world, Dad." Those moments gave my life meaning, as if all the day's exhaustion vanished. We lived in a 2-story house in Queen Anne Hill, a peaceful area with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. The house wasn't grand, but it was cozy, with large windows overlooking Puget Sound. Elena and I had stable incomes, enough to live comfortably, travel a few times a year, and save for Elizabeth's future. Our neighbors loved us, often inviting us to weekend barbecues. They called us the model family, a label I once took pride in, but now it only twists my heart. Everything changed one night 6 months ago. I was in Seattle just finishing work when my mother called. Her voice trembled, barely coherent. "Tucker, your father's gone." I stood frozen in the kitchen, the phone slipping from my hand. My father, John Harrison, had passed away in his sleep. The doctor said it was sudden cardiac arrest, a quick and painless death. But to me, it felt like a knife to the chest. I couldn't believe the strong man who once carried me on his shoulders running through fields was gone so suddenly. I drove all night to Asheville, my mind blank, accompanied only by the hum of the engine. The funeral was simple, cold. Only a few relatives and old neighbors came to say goodbye. My mother stood by the coffin, frail and silent, her eyes red but tearless. I held her hand, trying to find words of comfort, but everything felt meaningless. Elizabeth clung to me, small and confused, while Elena stood behind us, quiet as a shadow. But then I noticed something strange. Among the small crowd in the church, there were 3 men in black suits and sunglasses standing in a far corner. They didn't speak to anyone or offer condolences. Their gazes were cold, lingering on my mother for a long time as if sizing her up. I saw her hand tremble slightly. She looked down, avoiding their eyes. A wave of unease surged within me like something was deeply wrong, but I pushed it aside. I told myself it was just grief making me overly sensitive. My father was gone, and I was just trying to find a reason for the pain. The days after the funeral, I returned to Seattle, hoping life would fall back into place. I thought if I kept working, taking care of Elena and Elizabeth, everything would be fine. But I was wrong. The two-story house in Queen Anne Hill, once filled with Elizabeth's laughter and cozy dinners, now felt stiflingly quiet. Gone were the evenings when Elena sat beside me on the sofa, sharing stories about her day. Gone were the light-hearted chats about Elizabeth's drawings or plans for summer vacations. Instead, there was silence, a heavy, oppressive silence, as if someone had sucked all the air out of the house. Elena changed. She became distant, like a stranger living under the same roof. I caught her standing by the window, her eyes vacant, gripping her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. When I asked what she was thinking, she gave a faint smile and said, "Nothing, love. Just tired." But that smile never reached her eyes. I wanted to believe it was just grief over my father, that she was trying to cope too. But every time I tried to pull her closer, she pulled away as if an invisible wall stood between us. Elizabeth sensed it. She was more perceptive than I realized. One night, as I was reading her a bedtime story, she looked up at me, her big round eyes full of worry. "Daddy, did I do something wrong to make Mommy mad?" I froze, pulling her into a tight hug. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's just dealing with a lot right now." But her question cut me like a knife. I didn't know how to answer because I didn't understand what was happening myself. Work started to unravel too. I'd always prided myself on my meticulousness. My financial reports were never off, not even by a cent. But one morning I received an email from a longtime client, Mr. Harris, who owned a small chain of furniture stores. He said his company could no longer work with me. No reason? No explanation, just a curt line. "Thank you, but we'll be seeking another partner." I called him, trying to understand, but he only repeated, "I'm sorry, Tucker." His voice was cold, like he was reading from a script. Then a second client, then a third. People who once shook my hand with warm smiles now avoided me, giving vague responses. I started hearing whispers in meetings. "Tucker Harrison. He doesn't seem trustworthy. I heard he's been manipulating numbers for extra commissions." Those rumors were like sharp blades slicing into my honor. I wanted to scream that it was all lies, that I'd never done anything wrong. But I stayed silent, worked harder, hoping the truth would speak for itself. Then one day an email arrived from the company's internal audit department, brief but chilling. "Tucker Harrison, you are temporarily suspended pending an investigation into allegations of financial misconduct. Please return your office access card and refrain from contacting clients until further notice." I sat in front of the screen, heart pounding, feeling like the world was collapsing. I was innocent. I knew that. But reading that email, I felt like I'd been shoved into a dark corner where no one could hear me. I tried calling my supervisor, but he didn't answer. I sent emails explaining, insisting I'd done nothing wrong, but got only an automated reply. "We will review your case." I sat in my small home office, staring out the window, searching for a way out. But there was nothing. Just silence and a growing sense of helplessness. Meanwhile, every time I called Asheville, my mother worried me more. Her voice was frail, disjointed, as if every word took immense effort. "Everything's fine, Tucker," she said, but I could hear the tremble in her voice. When I drove to visit, I found her sitting in the old wooden house, dim light from a table lamp casting shadows on her gaunt face. She wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, just sitting there, clutching one of my father's antique clocks. "I'm fine," she repeated, but her eyes said otherwise, empty, as if she were hiding a burden too heavy to bear. I tried to make her eat, clean the dusty house, but every action seemed to make her more uneasy. Once I caught her staring out the window, her eyes panicked as if searching for someone. "Mom, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned, giving a weak smile. "Nothing, Tucker. I just miss your father." But I knew she was lying. I wanted to shout to shake her until she told the truth, but I couldn't. I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, she'd shatter. Day by day, I felt a shadow creeping into my life. It had no shape, no name, but I could feel its presence. My job, my marriage, my family, everything was cracking piece by piece. I started losing sleep, lying awake for hours, my mind racing with unanswered questions. Why were clients turning away? Why was Elena so different? Why did my mother seem so afraid? Then one night, as I sat alone in the living room staring at a family photo on the wall, a sharp realization hit me. It wasn't vague anymore, but clear, cold, like a blade pressed to my throat. My father's death wasn't as simple as everyone thought. I remembered the men in black suits at the funeral, their icy stares, my mother's trembling hands. I recalled my father's voice the last time we spoke when he said, "Tucker, be careful. Not everyone is as honest as they seem." At the time, I thought he was just talking about work, about difficult clients. But now I wasn't so sure. A week later, the hardest blow struck. I was sitting in the living room, sifting through a pile of emails in a desperate attempt to prove my innocence, when Elena walked in. She wore a gray sweater, her hair tied up high, her face as cold as stone. Without a greeting, she placed a stack of papers on the table, her voice flat. "Tucker, I've filed for divorce. You should read through this." I was stunned, as if someone had punched me square in the chest. "Divorce? Elena, what are you talking about? We can talk. What's going on?" But she just looked at me, her blue eyes devoid of any warmth. "Tucker, it's over. You must know why." I shook my head, reaching for her, but she turned and walked out of the room. I opened the papers, and each line cut into my heart like a knife. Elena accused me of gambling addiction, abusing her, and threatening the family. She presented a slew of documents, betting receipts, photos of bruises on her arms, text messages I'd never written, angry, threatening words sent from a number I didn't recognize. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling. It was all fabricated but prepared with chilling precision, as if someone had been planning this for a long time. I wanted to scream, to chase after Elena and demand why she was doing this, but I couldn't. A part of me was afraid that confronting her would reveal a truth I didn't want to face. The trial unfolded quickly, like a perfectly staged nightmare. The courtroom was cold, the fluorescent lights glaring down, stinging my eyes. I sat at the defendant's table while Elena sat across the room, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling as if she were a gentle wife deeply wounded. She wore a pale blue dress, a color I once loved, but now it only made her feel like a stranger. When she took the stand, her voice choked with emotion, each word sounding rehearsed 100 times. "He changed after his father died," she said, her eyes welling up. "He started drinking, hitting me, threatening to hurt Elizabeth if I spoke out. I just want to protect my daughter." Every word she spoke was like a hammer to my chest. I wanted to stand and shout that it was all lies, that I'd never touched her, that I loved Elizabeth more than life itself. But my lawyer, Mr. Davis, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Tucker, stay calm. Making a scene will only make things worse." Calm. How could I be calm when my entire world was collapsing? I looked at the evidence Elena presented, trying to explain to the judge, my voice breaking with desperation. "Your Honor, I didn't do these things. I don't know where these documents came from, but I swear I've never hurt my wife or daughter." But the judge's eyes were cold, as if he'd already made up his mind. Elena's lawyer, a tall man with a confident smile, presented everything flawlessly without a single gap. I felt like I was being pushed into an abyss, and no one could hear my cries for help. The most painful part was Elizabeth. She was brought to the courtroom for the final session, sitting in the back row with a social worker. My heart shattered when I saw her. Elizabeth wore a pale yellow dress, her curly hair tied to one side, her big round eyes looking at me with confusion. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice so soft I could barely hear it. I wanted to run to her, hold her, and tell her it was all a misunderstanding. But the social worker held her hand tightly, and Elizabeth's expression shifted from confusion to fear as Elena stood, pulling her into an embrace, playing the role of a mother shielding her child from a cruel father. "Mommy, did Daddy do something wrong?" Elizabeth asked, her voice trembling. Elena just stroked her head, whispering something I couldn't hear. I saw tears stream down Elizabeth's cheeks, and I knew in that moment that she didn't believe the accusations, but she was too young to understand, too young to fight this storm. When the judge delivered the verdict, it felt like the ground beneath me gave way. The court awarded all our shared assets, the 2-story house in Queen Anne Hill, our savings, totaling $2.5 million, to Elena. But what broke my heart was custody of Elizabeth. The court granted it to Elena, citing that I was unfit to be a father due to violent and irresponsible behavior. Rage surged through me, uncontrollable. "No, you can't take her from me. Elizabeth is everything to me." My voice cracked, echoing in the courtroom, but the judge only banged his gavel, ordering me to maintain order. Elizabeth sobbed, struggling against the social worker's grip to reach me, but they held her back. "Daddy! Daddy!" Her cries tore my heart apart. I collapsed into the chair, tears streaming down my face, powerless as the social worker led her out of the room, her sobs fading behind the door. The court also issued a restraining order, barring me from contacting Elena or Elizabeth. It was like a noose tightening around my neck, suffocating me. As I left the courtroom, I saw Elena in the hallway, holding Elizabeth. My daughter looked at me, her eyes red, but Elena pulled her away, giving me no chance to speak. I stood there, helpless, watching the woman I once loved and the daughter who was my light walk out of my life. Just days after the trial, the company called me to the office. I hoped they'd finished their investigation, that the truth would be cleared. But when I arrived, only the HR manager was there with a white envelope on the desk. "Tucker, we're sorry, but the company can't keep you. The allegations, they've damaged our reputation." I wanted to laugh bitterly. Reputation? My reputation had been smeared, torn apart by lies, and now they were firing me for reputation? I said nothing, took the envelope and walked out, my feet heavy as lead. I returned to the house that was no longer mine. Elena had moved out, taking Elizabeth and everything inside. I stood in the empty living room with only a few items not listed as shared assets left behind. Among them was my father's old pickup truck, a rusty 1980s Ford that still ran well. It was the only thing I had left, a relic from the father who left too soon. Within weeks, I lost everything. My family, my career, my home, my savings. I slept on a couch in a cheap rented apartment, listening to the roar of traffic outside, trying not to think of Elizabeth. But her image kept surfacing, her radiant smile, her curly hair, her innocent question, "Daddy, is everything okay?" I wanted to scream that no, nothing was okay, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew this storm wasn't over yet. I couldn't stay in Seattle any longer. The city, with its once familiar streets, had become a maze of pain. Every corner, every coffee shop, reminded me of the days I walked hand in hand with Elizabeth, or the evenings Elena and I sat by the window, dreaming of the future. Now they were nothing but ruins. I packed a few clothes, the little money I had left, and climbed into my father's old pickup truck. I started the engine, its grumbling roar filling the air, and drove to Ridgewood, where my father's wooden cabin stood. Ridgewood is a small town nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, not far from Asheville. The cabin held my fondest memories, sweltering summer days when I ran barefoot on the grass, listening to my father's stories of his youthful fishing trips. When I pulled up in front of the cabin, my heart tightened. It was exactly as I remembered, the creaky porch, the weathered wooden windows and the tall pines surrounding it, as if time had never touched this place. I stepped out of the truck, taking a deep breath. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth. I opened the door and the hinges let out a long, screeching groan. Inside, the space smelled heavy with must, mixed with the stale ash from a fireplace long unused. Faint light from the windows illuminated thick layers of dust coating the furniture. I stood in the middle of the room feeling like I was stepping into an older version of myself, a younger, more carefree Tucker, untouched by life's blows. I began cleaning, as if wiping away the dust could erase the pain in my heart. I opened the windows, letting cool air rush in, carrying the rustle of leaves. I swept the floor, wiped the tables, and gathered my father's belongings. A pair of silver-rimmed reading glasses on a shelf, a fishing log with meticulous handwritten notes of dates and catches, and a few faded family photos. In one photo, I saw myself at 5 years old, perched on my father's shoulders, grinning ear to ear by the river. My mother stood beside us, smiling gently, holding a picnic basket. I touched the photo, my fingers tracing my father's face, and tears welled up unexpectedly. "Dad, what do I do now?" I whispered, but only silence answered. I kept cleaning, trying to keep my mind occupied. As I moved my father's old desk, I heard an unusual creak from the floor. I paused, frowning. The sound wasn't like the groan of old wood or an aging floorboard. I knelt down, pressing my hand against the wooden plank beneath the desk. It was loose, as if someone had deliberately nailed it back haphazardly. My heart beat faster. I pulled out a small pocket knife and gently pried the plank loose. The old nails gave way easily, revealing a dark hollow beneath. I reached in, my heart pounding, and pulled out a small rusted tin box, surprisingly heavy. I brushed off the dust caked on its lid, the old scratched and dented tin bearing the marks of time. I sat on the floor, placing the box on my lap, my trembling hands lifting the lid. Inside was a thick stack of documents, a few photos, and a yellowed envelope with handwritten words. To Tucker. The handwriting was my father's, shaky, as if written in haste or fear. I opened the envelope, revealing a short letter, just a few lines, but each word cut like a knife. If you're reading this, it means I could no longer protect you. Know that I did everything for you. Trust no one, not even those closest to you. I read it over and over, trying to grasp the meaning of his words. Those closest to you? Who was he talking about? My mother? Elena? Or someone else entirely? I set the letter down, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped it. I turned to the documents. The pages were old, some yellowed, stamped with the FBI's seal, a bold red mark like blood. There were investigation reports, bank transfer records with staggering sums, and a strange logo, a hawk clutching a gold coin in its talons. I flipped through the pages quickly, searching for clues, but it was all a tangled puzzle with no clear answers. Then I reached the final page, and the world seemed to stop. It was a photo, not faded like the others, but sharp and clear, as if taken recently. In it, my mother, Jane, stood next to Elena. They weren't smiling, their faces stern, almost tense. Beside them was a stranger, a man in a black suit and sunglasses. I recognized him instantly, one of the 3 men from my father's funeral. His gaze was cold, his lips pressed tight, as if he knew the camera was capturing the moment. I slumped against the wall, staring at the envelope in my hand. My heart pounded, but my mind was blank. Everything I'd believed in, family, love, truth, crumbled in that moment. What was my mother's connection to these documents? And Elena, the woman I once loved, why was she standing beside my mother in this photo? Who were the men in black suits, and why did they appear both at the funeral and in my father's hidden secrets? I clutched the letter tightly, feeling as if my father's breath lingered in the shaky strokes of his handwriting. Trust no one, he had written. But I had trusted Elena, trusted my mother, trusted that my life was real. Now all I had left was this tin box, fragments of a truth I wasn't ready to face. I looked out the window where the fiery sunset bathed the forest in gold. I knew from this moment on my life would never be the same. I couldn't stay in the cabin a minute longer. The tin box sat on the passenger seat, heavy as if it held my entire world. I started the pickup truck, its engine roaring through Ridgewood's stillness, and drove all night to Asheville. The winding mountain road stretched endlessly, the headlights slicing through the pitch-black night. But all I could see was the image of my mother and Elena in that photo, standing beside the man in the black suit. When I pulled up to my mother's house in Asheville, dawn was breaking. The faint morning light filtered through the trees, illuminating the weathered wooden house. I stepped out, clutching the tin box, feeling like I was carrying a ticking time bomb. The front door was slightly ajar, as if she knew I was coming. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and the sight of my mother made my heart clench. She sat by the window, frail as a shadow, her silver hair disheveled. She didn't look up as I entered, her eyes fixed outside, vacant, as if she'd been expecting this moment. "Mom," I called, my voice hoarse. She turned, her eyes clouded, but said nothing. I set the tin box on the table, opened it, and pulled out the documents and the photo. "Mom, I need you to explain. What is this? Why are you and Elena in this picture? And these FBI reports, what do they have to do with Dad?" My voice trembled, not from anger, but from the growing fear in my chest. Fear that what I was about to hear would destroy the last shred of trust I had left. My mother froze. She looked at the photo, her trembling hand touching it as if brushing an old wound. She shook her head, whispering, "Tucker, you weren't supposed to know about this." Her voice cracked, laced with fear and exhaustion. I stayed silent, my eyes locked on her. After a moment, she looked up at me, the look of someone who'd been running for too long with nowhere left to hide. Finally, she forced herself to speak, each word heavy. "All right. If you've come this far, I'll tell you." She took a deep breath, her voice faint but clear. "Tucker, I never wanted you to know these things. Your father and we tried to keep you out of it." She revealed that years ago, when she was young, she worked for an underground criminal organization, a network involved in money laundering and arms trafficking. "I'm not proud of it," she said, staring at the floor. "But back then I had no choice. I grew up in poverty and they promised a better life. My father, John Harrison, wasn't the ordinary administrative worker I'd believed him to be. He was an FBI agent embedded in the organization to investigate it. They met during a mission, two people on opposite sides, but love drew them together. When their true identities were revealed, instead of betraying each other, they chose to abandon everything. They fled to Asheville, built a new life, and hoped the past would never find them. We lived in peace, Tucker," my mother said, her voice choking, "until you grew up. Until you brought Elena home to meet us." My blood ran cold. "Elena?" I whispered, as if her name had become a curse. My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She was one of them, Tucker. They found us. They knew your father was once an agent, and they wanted to ensure he'd never reveal the truth." I gripped the edge of the table, trying not to collapse. "So why did Dad die?" I asked, dreading the answer. My mother lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. "They threatened me. Elena said if I didn't get rid of your father, they'd kill you. I couldn't lose you, Tucker. I couldn't." She looked up, her eyes filled with anguish. "I poisoned him. A small dose, enough to stop his heart in his sleep. I've lived with that guilt every day since he left us." I stood frozen, unable to believe what I'd just heard. The gentle mother I'd known had killed my father? I wanted to scream, to deny it, but her voice, weak, sincere, left no room for doubt. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, tears spilling over. "Why did you let things go this far?" She shook her head, her voice breaking. "I wanted to protect you, but I was wrong, Tucker. I was wrong to think silence would keep you safe." She turned away, gathering the scattered papers on the table, smoothing out an old family photo. Her movements were slow, strangely gentle, as if she were saying goodbye to something. A chill ran down my spine, an uneasy feeling I couldn't quite place, my mind too tangled to understand. "Mom, I'll find a way to fix this," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'll bring the truth to light." She turned back, her eyes empty, light as a wordless farewell. "You're the only thing your father and I ever did right, Tucker. she said, then smiled. A sad, haunting smile, as if she were finally letting go. I wanted to stay, to hold her, to say I forgave her, but my throat was too tight. I walked out of the house, carrying the tin box and a heart heavy with grief. Outside, the night wind blew cold, unaware that it was the last time I'd see my mother. That night, I didn't sleep. Her final words echoed in my head, mingling with the sound of rain on the truck's roof. The next morning, I tried calling her, but no one answered. A bad feeling surged, making my heart race. When I returned to Asheville that afternoon, the house was eerily still. I stepped inside, and a cold dread enveloped me. My mother lay in the armchair, her face peaceful as if asleep. On the table was an empty bottle of sleeping pills and a hastily written note. "I've paid my price, my son. Do what your father wanted." I collapsed to the floor, sobs tearing from my chest. Pain surged alongside rage, at the world, at fate, at myself. Both my father and mother were gone, leaving me with an undeniable truth. If I didn't keep going, their sacrifices would be for nothing. And in that moment I swore I would bring everything to light, even if it cost me my life. The days following my mother's death plunged me into a profound silence. I sat in my cheap rented apartment, surrounded by cluttered belongings, staring at the tin box on the table. The documents inside were like a curse, each page a piece of the tragedy that had torn my family apart. I flipped through them, trying to connect the dots. And then it hit me. Elena was the catalyst for it all. The woman I once loved, once trusted, was part of the organization that destroyed my parents' lives. And now mine. The pain in my heart slowly turned into a burning flame. Not just sorrow, but a seething hatred. I swore that she and those behind her would pay. I couldn't act alone. The documents were too vast, too dangerous. I needed someone I could trust, and the only person who came to mind was Grant Miller. Grant was my best friend from college, a lawyer specializing in economic and criminal cases, always calm even in the most tense situations. He wasn't one to boast, but I knew Grant had deep connections, including within federal agencies. I called him from a payphone. I didn't dare use my own, fearing someone was watching. "Grant, I need to meet you. It's a matter of life and death," I said, my voice hoarse. He didn't ask much, only replied, "Meet me at the Blue Pine Motel off Highway 90 tonight at 8. The meeting took place quietly in a small roadside motel a few miles from Seattle. The place was run down, with flickering neon lights and the acrid smell of burnt coffee from the front desk. Grant sat in a corner of the diner wearing an old jacket and a baseball cap, as if he too understood the gravity of this meeting. I placed the tin box on the table and slid it toward him. "This is everything I have," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "FBI reports, bank transfers, a criminal organization, and my mother, my wife. They're both involved." Grant looked at me, his gaze sharp but non-judgmental. He opened the box, scanning the documents, and I saw his shoulders tense slightly when he spotted the FBI seal and the logo of a hawk clutching a gold coin. "Tucker, are you sure you want to go through with this?" Grant asked, his voice low. "This stuff, it could get you killed." I nodded, clenching my fists. "I have nothing left to lose, Grant. My parents died because of this organization. They took Elizabeth. I have to do this." Grant was silent for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll pass this directly to the FBI through an internal channel. I know someone trustworthy, but you need to brace yourself. If they take this case, everything will change." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was truly ready. "Do it," I said. "Tomorrow morning." Grant left with the tin box, and I returned to my apartment, feeling as if I'd just entrusted my entire life to someone else. The days that followed were a tense blur of waiting. I couldn't sleep. Every small noise outside my window made me jump. I imagined men in black suits appearing, dragging me into the darkness just as they had with my parents. But I couldn't stop. Not now. 3 days later, a call came from an unknown number. I picked up, my heart pounding. A calm, professional voice spoke. "Mr. Tucker Harrison?" This is Special Agent Larson, FBI. We've received the documents from your lawyer. I can't say much over the phone, but they're being handled with the utmost confidentiality. You need to prepare for the next steps. I swallowed hard and asked, "What's next?" There was a brief pause before the voice replied, "We'll place you in the Witness Protection Program. Be ready. A team will meet you within 24 hours. Everything moved quickly after that. A team of agents arrived at my apartment dressed in black suits, but not the kind that sent shivers down my spine at my father's funeral. They took me to a small, unmarked office where I was given a new identity, Thomas Reed, a name I had to memorize. They explained that the cabin in Ridgewood had been sealed, and I'd be relocated to a safe location. "No phones, no contact, no social media," one agent said, his voice cold but not without empathy. "From now on, Tucker Harrison no longer exists." I was taken to a small town in Oregon where quiet streets and endless cornfields stretched out. My new home was a modest apartment with a window overlooking a deserted road and a surveillance team always lurking out of sight. I lived discreetly as Thomas Reed, contacting no one, avoiding the internet, making no calls. Silence enveloped me, heavy and hopeless. I spent hours in an armchair, staring out the window, trying not to think of Elizabeth. But her image haunted me. Every night I dreamed of her, of running to her and holding her, only to wake up in the cold, empty room with nothing but the howling wind outside. Memories of my parents wouldn't let go either. I recalled my mother's trembling voice as she confessed to poisoning my father, her vacant eyes before she took her own life. I remembered my father's letter, the warning I hadn't understood in time. I wondered if I could have done anything differently to save them, to keep Elizabeth with me. But now, I could only wait, in silence and solitude, hoping the FBI would keep their promise. One morning, as dawn barely broke, a black car pulled up outside my apartment. Two agents stepped out and knocked on the door. "Mr. Reed," one said, his voice low and measured, "we have news." My heart raced, but I kept my composure, inviting them inside. They informed me that the FBI had launched an investigation codenamed Operation Falcon, targeting an international criminal network called the Golden Hawk Syndicate, the organization my father had been investigating before his death. "Your documents," the other agent said, "were the key. They're not just evidence. They're a detailed map of the syndicate's decades-long operations in money laundering, arms trafficking, and political bribery." I sank into a chair, feeling as if I could finally breathe after days of suffocation. The papers in that tin box, the ones my father hid, the secrets my mother carried to her grave, had become a weapon against the monster that destroyed my family. "What's next?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The lead agent looked at me, his gaze sharp but respectful. "We've deployed teams in Seattle, Chicago, and London, but you need to be patient and stay safe." 2 days later, I turned on the old TV in my apartment, a rare act since I avoided drawing attention. The evening news hit like a bomb. Footage of Elena, my ex-wife, handcuffed and being led out of a luxury Seattle condo flashed across every channel. "University lecturer arrested for ties to international crime syndicate," the headlines screamed. I sat frozen, staring at Elena's face on the screen. She was no longer the confident woman with sharp eyes I once loved. Her brown hair was disheveled, her eyes vacant, as if she knew it was over. The camera panned to FBI agents searching her apartment, hauling out boxes of documents and computers. The media called it the largest covert takedown in 2 decades, and my name, or rather, my old identity, wasn't mentioned. But I knew I had set it all in motion. The FBI later revealed that Elena was a key figure in the Golden Hawk Syndicate, under the guise of a communications lecturer. She managed offshore money transfers and manipulated data to frame me with false financial allegations. During interrogation, she confessed everything. I wasn't allowed to know the details, but Special Agent Larson called me on a secure line, saying her testimony had expanded the investigation. Within 48 hours, high-ranking syndicate members in Seattle, Chicago, and London were arrested. The Golden Hawk Syndicate's financial empire, a colossal machine that thrived in the shadows, collapsed like a house of cards. I sat in my apartment listening to the rain patter on the roof, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. But joy didn't come. Instead, there was emptiness, the cost of losing my parents, of living in solitude for months. All I wanted was Elizabeth. I wanted her back, to hold her, to tell her I'd done everything to protect her. Then one day, Agent Larson called again. "Mr. Reed, we have good news," he said. "Based on the evidence and Elena Harrison's testimony, the federal court has overturned your previous divorce ruling. She deceived the court to seize your assets. You've been fully exonerated." I gripped the phone, tears streaming down my face. "What about Elizabeth?" I asked, my voice trembling. Larson paused, then said, "A custody hearing is scheduled this week. We believe you'll be granted custody." On the day of the custody hearing, I stood before the federal courthouse, reclaiming my true identity for the first time in months. Tucker Harrison. I wore an old suit, feeling like a stranger in my own body. The courtroom was crowded, camera flashes relentless, but I didn't care. I only watched the door where Elizabeth would enter. When she appeared, her curly hair tied to one side, my heart stopped. "Daddy!" she shouted, running toward me, throwing herself into my arms. I held her tightly, tears rolling down my cheeks, oblivious to the eyes around us. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'll never leave you again." The court granted me full custody of Elizabeth. I barely heard the judge's gavel, only felt the warmth of my daughter in my arms. All I saw was Elizabeth, her radiant smile, and I knew I'd accomplished what my parents couldn't, bringing the truth to light. The FBI sent me a letter acknowledging my role in dismantling the Golden Hawk Syndicate. They called me the key witness in the biggest takedown in 2 decades. My financial advisor license was restored, my name cleared from investigations, and all my rightful assets, the Queen Anne Hill house, the $2.5 million in savings, were returned. But those things no longer mattered. I had Elizabeth, and that was all I needed. I sat with her in our old house, listening to her talk about the paintings she wanted to create. I smiled for the first time in months, feeling my heart begin to beat again. My parents had sacrificed everything to protect the truth, and now I'd done what they'd hoped. I looked out the window where the sunset bathed Puget Sound in gold and thought that perhaps, at last, justice had prevailed. 2 weeks after the custody hearing, I received a call from Special Agent Larson of the FBI. His voice was low and curt as usual. "Mr. Harrison, Elena wants to meet you. She says it's the last time. The decision is yours." I sat frozen, gripping the phone, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to refuse, to leave Elena. The woman who betrayed me took Elizabeth and destroyed my family, in the past forever. But another part, deep inside, knew I needed closure. Not out of resentment, but because I wanted to move forward. For Elizabeth, for myself. After much hesitation, I agreed. "I'll come," I said, my voice dry. The visiting room at the detention facility was cold, with gray walls and flickering fluorescent lights. I sat on a hard plastic chair, facing a thick glass partition. When Elena walked in, I barely recognized her. The radiant woman with glossy brown hair and confident eyes was gone, replaced by someone gaunt and weary. Her hair was disheveled, tied back carelessly, her face pale without a trace of makeup. Her blue eyes, once so captivating, were sunken and tired. She sat down, hands clasped tightly on the table, avoiding my gaze. The conversation was brief and heavy, as if we were both walking on a fragile thread. "Tucker," she began, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know the truth." I sat silently, waiting, feeling as if my heart was being squeezed. She took a deep breath and continued. "Our marriage, it was never real. The organization arranged for me to get close to you, to monitor your father. John knew too much, and they feared he'd expose everything. When you brought me to meet them, I reported back. I had no choice, Tucker. They threatened to kill me if I didn't comply. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm, but anger surged like a wave. Then why, Elena? Why destroy me? Why frame me, take Elizabeth away? My voice trembled, unable to hide the pain. She lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know you won't believe me, but I didn't want to hurt you. After your father died, they forced me to keep going. To frame you, take your assets, cut all ties to protect the organization. But every day, seeing you and Elizabeth, I saw what I was destroying. The guilt ate away at me, Tucker. When the FBI arrested me, I decided to tell them everything. Not for a reduced sentence, but for you. You deserve the truth. I looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman I once loved, but there was nothing left. Just a stranger trapped by her own wrong choices. Elizabeth, I said, my voice choking, does she know? Elena shook her head, tears falling onto the table. No, I never let her know. She loves you, Tucker. She always asked about you, even when I tried to keep her away. My heart felt crushed. I wanted to scream, to ask how she could do that to our daughter, but I stayed silent. The meeting ended in heavy silence. Elena stood, giving me one last look, her eyes a wordless apology. I said nothing, just turned away, leaving her to her own darkness. 3 days later, the federal court issued its verdict. Elena was sentenced to 35 years in prison for participating in an organized crime syndicate, fabricating federal evidence, and inciting murder. However, due to her full cooperation with the FBI providing detailed testimony about the Golden Hawk Syndicate's structure and finances, her sentence was reduced to 22 years. I felt no satisfaction hearing the news. Only emptiness, as if all my emotions had been drained. Elena had paid her price, but the cost my family bore was far greater. A month later, Elizabeth and I left the United States. Seattle was now just a painful memory, its streets evoking the days I lost everything. I wanted to give Elizabeth a fresh start, a place where she could paint her pictures unburdened by the past. We moved to a small coastal town in southern France, Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, where Mediterranean waves lapped gently against white sand and pastel-colored houses nestled under golden sunlight. The house we rented was a modest stone villa, its walls covered in ivy with a balcony overlooking the sparkling sea. Each morning, the scent of freshly baked bread from the local bakery wafted through the windows, mingling with the salty sea air and lavender from nearby fields. Life here was simple but vibrant. I worked remotely for an international financial consulting firm, sitting at a small wooden desk with my laptop, gazing out at sailboats drifting lazily on the water. The job wasn't demanding, but it provided enough for Elizabeth and me to live comfortably. Elizabeth attended a local art school, where she immersed herself in mixing colors and painting scenes of the sea, cobblestone streets, and vivid sunsets. I often took her for walks along the beach, where she ran through the sand, collecting shiny pebbles and sharing her dreams. "Dad, I want to paint a huge picture of this whole town," she said, her arms sweeping as if to embrace the entire scene. Each evening, we sat on the balcony, eating simple dinners of bread, cheese, and grilled fish from the local market. Elizabeth loved hearing stories about my father. Not the FBI agent, but the man who loved fishing and collecting antique clocks. I told her about our days in Ridgewood, how he taught me to hold a fishing rod, and she giggled, her eyes sparkling. Those moments, however small, were medicine for my wounds. I looked at her curly hair dancing in the sea breeze, and felt lighter than ever before. At dawn in France, I stood with Elizabeth on the beach, gazing at the horizon where the sun rose in a fiery red. She held my hand, talking about the paintings she wanted to create. "Dad, I want to paint us standing here, never apart," she said, her voice clear as a bell. I smiled, pulling her into a hug, feeling my heart finally begin to heal. I knew justice had been served, not through Elena's sentence or the collapse of the Golden Hawk Syndicate, but through the peace Elizabeth and I had today. We had survived the storm, and though the scars remained, I believed the future held warm, sunny days where we could rebuild what was lost. Every morning I wake up early, brew a cup of coffee, and stand on the small balcony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. The waves lap gently against the shore, carrying the salty scent of the sea and the cries of seagulls circling the deep blue sky. Elizabeth often runs out, her curly hair a tangled mess, clutching a paintbrush and a sketchbook. "Dad, today I want to paint the sunrise," she exclaims, her eyes sparkling like the dawn. I smile, ruffle her hair, and feel my heart lighter than ever. Here in this small coastal town, we've found a place to heal, to start anew. But I know the journey to this moment was far from easy, and the lessons I've learned from that storm will stay with me for the rest of my life. Sitting here with my coffee growing cold, I think about everything that happened. My parents, Elena, the days I thought I'd never stand again. My life was once a perfect painting crafted from what I believed was real. A happy family, a solid career, a world where trust was always reciprocated. But that painting shattered, and I realized that sometimes the truth hidden behind the things we cherish most can cut like a knife. My father tried to warn me, trust no one, and I wish I'd listened sooner. But if I hadn't walked through that darkness, I'd never have understood the value of light. The first lesson I want to share is about trust. Trust is precious, but it's also fragile. I trusted Elena, believed our love was real, believed she'd never hurt me or Elizabeth. I trusted my mother, believed she was the gentle woman who always protected me. But blind trust came at a cost. I'm not saying you shouldn't trust anyone, because without trust we'd live in solitude. But trust cautiously. Look deeper into those around you, listen to the words they don't say. And don't be afraid to ask questions, even if the answers might break your heart. The second lesson is about resilience. When I lost everything, my family, my career, my honor, I thought I'd hit rock bottom. There were nights I lay on the sofa in that rundown apartment, listening to the traffic outside, wondering if it was worth going on. But every time I thought of Elizabeth, her smile, my parents' sacrifices, I knew I couldn't give up. Life will throw you into storms you never see coming, but it's in the darkest moments that you'll find strength you didn't know you had. I stood up, not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice. And neither do you. When everything falls apart, find a reason to stand, even if it's just a tiny spark of hope. The final lesson, perhaps the most important, is about truth. Truth isn't always pleasant. Sometimes it's painful, cruel, and makes you want to turn away. When I found the tin box in the cabin, when my mother confessed to poisoning my father, when Elena admitted our marriage was a lie, I wanted to run from it all. But I learned that truth, no matter how brutal, is the only thing that can set you free. It gave me the strength to confront the Golden Hawk Syndicate, to bring those behind it to light, and to reclaim Elizabeth. If you're hiding from a truth or afraid to face it, remember that avoidance only traps you longer. Be brave and step forward no matter how rough the path. My advice to you, those hearing this story, is to live honestly but not naively. Love, but don't be blind. Fight for what you believe in, even when the world turns its back on you. And above all, cherish those you love, for they are the only light that can guide you through the darkness. I lost my parents, lost years thinking I knew them. But I still have Elizabeth, and every day with her reminds me that every pain I endured was worth it. Today I stand with Elizabeth on the beach, watching her paint the shimmering waves under the sunlight. She turns to me, her smile radiant, and says, "Dad, I want to paint the whole world for you." I laugh, pulling her into a hug, feeling her warmth like a promise of the future. Our life isn't perfect. The scars remain, the memories still sting. But it's ours, built on truth and love. If you're in the middle of your own storm, remember my words. You're stronger than you think. Find the light, no matter how small, and hold on to it. Because in the end, that light will lead you home, 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 will lead you home.